Hi, I'm Marie, and I'm 30 years old. I've been married to my husband, Sam, for 4 years. We really wanted to have kids right after we got married, but it just didn't happen for us. The doctors checked me out, and everything seemed fine, but Sam wasn't keen on getting checked himself. So we kind of gave up trying for a baby. Sometimes I wondered what might happen if Sam went for tests and treatment, but I realized that having a child isn't the only path to happiness. I never pushed him to go to the doctor. I work as an architect at a construction company, and I love what I do. My salary is good, and I find my job really fulfilling. So I started thinking that not having kids might be okay. Sam works for the government, and while he earns less than me, his job is stable. We have a great life together. We enjoy doing things we love, eating tasty food, and going on trips every now and then. That's Sally, my sister, calling me from outside the house with her sweet, pleading voice again. It's way too early for anyone to be dropping by, especially on a weekday. With a sigh, I made my way to the front door. Can you stop coming over so early? I'm sorry, but I've got something going on. Can you take care of Annie again? I looked after her just the other day, remember? Please, I need your help. Sally, who's 3 years younger than me, became a mom to Annie 4 years ago through a sudden marriage that didn't last long. Now she's raising Annie on her own. Lately, she's been relying on me to babysit several times a week for even the smallest reasons. It's urgent. I had no other choice, right? I have work too, but you're working from home, Marie. Just let her nap next to you, please, she asked, already placing Annie's things at the door as if it's already decided. Feeling unable to say no, I sighed and agreed to watch my niece. Thanks, I'll pick her up later, Sally said happily as she left. She was dressed up, wearing a short skirt. I wondered what she was up to. Watching her walk away in her high heels, I felt a mix of emotions. My 4-year-old niece is such a calm and easy child to care for. Sometimes she gets a bit teary, but her adorable smile makes everything better. Even though I thought having kids wasn't in the cards for us, spending time with her made me realize just how precious little ones can be. It saddens me to see her mom, my sister Sally, leaving her with me so often. I've mentioned to Sally that it's not ideal to leave her daughter so frequently, but I'm still happy to look after my niece. When Sally came to pick her up later that evening, she didn't even offer an apology. She just took her daughter and left in a hurry. Then my husband arrived home, and Sally left her child with us again for the day. I tried to talk to my husband about my day, but he seemed disinterested and barely responded. I understand that being a single mom is tough for Sally, but I also feel like my husband should be more supportive. He brushed off the conversation and went to take a shower. That's when I noticed his phone buzzing on the table, something he usually never leaves unattended. Curious, I glanced at the screen and saw that the caller was Sally. Confused, I wondered why she would be calling him. Before I could think too much about it, my husband returned and quickly grabbed his phone, rushing off to the bathroom. I tried to brush it off, but the message from Sally lingered in my mind. I need to see you urgently. Was Sally messaging my husband? Could he be cheating on me? These thoughts raced through my mind, but I couldn't find any solid answers. Since then, I never had another opportunity to check his phone. I'm feeling a bit peckish. Oh, sorry, sweetheart, I got distracted, I said as I lifted my niece into my arms. She looked up at me with those innocent eyes, melting my heart. If Sally is really having an affair with my husband, it means she's putting her desires ahead of her own child. How could she abandon such an adorable little girl? If my suspicions are true, I don't know if I could ever forgive either Sally or my husband. Here are the findings from the investigation. Thank you, I said, trying to steady my voice as I accepted the report from the detective agency I had hired. The results confirmed my worst fears. My husband was indeed having an affair. It hit me like a ton of bricks, but I managed to hold back my tears. I had mentally prepared myself for this moment. As it turned out, my husband and Sally were deeply involved in this affair. It wasn't just a one-time mistake or a brief lapse in judgment. They had been meeting several times a week, going to great lengths to cover their tracks. Looking back, I recalled how my husband, typically punctual and returning home from his government job, suddenly started working late on the days Sally brought my niece over. He always had some excuse ready to defend Sally's actions when she left her child with us. Why hadn't I noticed these patterns before? They both often came home at the same time, but I never connected the dots until now. Receiving the report, I was overwhelmed with uncertainty about what steps to take next. Should I confide in my parents or confront both of them? But before anything else, my niece came to mind. You're having an affair, aren't you? I confronted my husband abruptly, catching him off guard. What? No, what are you talking about? Don't spout nonsense, he retorted, clearly taken aback by my accusation. You're cheating with Sally, aren't you? I pressed, my certainty leaving him visibly flustered, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape from the truth. Too late, I already know everything. Let's get a divorce, I declared firmly, his face flushed with anger at being labeled as the lowest of the low. But as I confronted the reality of my husband's affair with Sally, a cold numbness overtook me. I felt indifferent, detached from the situation. Both Sally and my husband seemed despicable for their betrayal. Despite being entitled to compensation in a divorce court, I couldn't bear the thought of my niece suffering. So I made the decision not to pursue compensation from Sally and to keep the affair a secret from our parents. Let me think about it. It's all so sudden, my husband replied, trying to regain his composure. Reluctantly, I agreed to give him time to process everything. Little did I know, it was a mistake. The next day, he didn't return home at his usual time. I waited anxiously, wondering if he and Sally were scheming something together. Despite my concerns, I chose to wait without reaching out to him. I was startled by the sound of a child crying nearby. Stepping outside, I couldn't believe what I saw. Annie, my niece, wrapped in a blanket, stood alone in front of my house, looking lost. My heart sank as I watched Sally and my husband speed away in their car. I hesitated for a moment, torn between chasing after them and staying with Annie, who was crying inconsolably. In the end, I couldn't leave her behind, so I stayed and watched their car disappear into the distance. How could they abandon a child like that? What if something terrible had happened to Annie while they were gone? The mere thought sent chills down my spine, filling me with anger towards the two people who could so callously neglect their responsibilities. They weren't human, they were monsters. As I lifted Annie into my arms, I noticed several papers bundled up with her blanket. Among them were divorce papers with my husband's signature and letters from both him and Sally. They apologized for their actions, expressing their love for each other and their desire to be together. They left Annie in my care. Reading those words filled me with a tumult of emotions: frustration, anger, and a profound sense of betrayal. Unable to contain my feelings any longer, I broke down in tears, overwhelmed by the sudden and drastic turn of events. I decided to confide in my parents about everything that had unfolded, including Annie being abandoned. They rushed over as soon as they could. Through tears, I showed them the evidence of Sally and my husband's affair, explaining the whole situation. Mom hugged me tightly, offering comfort, while Dad's hands trembled with anger. "What's your plan now?" Dad asked, his voice tense with emotion. "I'm filing for divorce," I replied firmly. "Good. That's the right decision. We'll need to discuss this with your husband's parents as well," Dad insisted. My parents were determined to sever ties with Sally. They made it clear that even if she sought refuge with them, they wouldn't offer any help. "Annie is our precious granddaughter. We'll take care of her," Dad declared, his gaze resting on Annie, who was peacefully sleeping. Mom's eyes were downcast, tears welling up. "No, I'll take care of her," I asserted, my decision unwavering. "You don't have to do that. Consider what they've done." "You don't owe them anything," Mom urged, concerned that I might be swayed by Sally and my husband's letters. But my resolve was firm. "Annie is incredibly dear to me. I see her as my own child. I want to adopt her," I explained. My parents seemed troubled but respected my decision. They assured me of their support and urged me to consult them whenever needed, which brought me some comfort. The next day, I decided to inquire about my husband's whereabouts at his workplace, only to discover that he had already resigned. I was certain he had vanished without a trace. When I checked our bank account, it was wiped clean. I couldn't help but be impressed by how swiftly he had managed to empty it all in just one day. However, only a small portion of the money, which was in an account my husband had easy access to, had been withdrawn. The rest of our savings were safely tucked away in another account. I had made the decision to transfer the funds as a precaution, and now I was grateful for that foresight. It was a small move on my part, but it saved us from financial ruin. I also reached out to Sally's ex-husband, hoping he might want to be involved in his daughter's life, but he showed no interest. It pained me to think about my niece's situation, but I was determined to give her all the love and care she deserved. After finalizing my divorce, I officially adopted my niece. Together, we embarked on a fresh start in a new location. Life presented its challenges, but it was also filled with joy. My niece taught me the highs and lows of parenthood, and as the years went by, I cherished every moment, especially the day she called me Mom for the first time. Despite the hardships we faced, the love I felt for my daughter gave me strength to persevere. Balancing work and parenting, a decade flew by in the blink of an eye. Then on the day my daughter turned 14, I received an unexpected call on my cell phone. "Mom, there's a call for you," my daughter called from the other room. "Okay," I replied, glancing at the screen, which displayed only a phone number. I wondered who could be calling. Curiosity piqued, I answered, and a familiar voice greeted me from the other end. "Hi Marie, it's Sally. It's been a while." It was Sally. Even after all these years, she spoke as if nothing had changed. Her casual tone made their sudden reappearance feel surreal. "Mom, are you okay?" my daughter asked, concern evident in her voice. "Yes, I'll handle it, but you should stay back. Can you call Grandma and let her know Sally's here? Phil, do you understand?" I instructed my daughter, sensing the seriousness of the situation. She nodded firmly and quickly made the call to my mom. As she did, I closed the door to the living room, preparing myself for what was to come, and then opened the front door to confront Sally. "I knew you were here. This isn't acceptable. You're disturbing the neighbors," I stated firmly as I faced Sally, who stood on my doorstep. "Well, you took forever to answer the door. Isn't that right?" Sally retorted casually. "It's been too long." Behind Sally, my ex-husband stood awkwardly, a surprise I hadn't anticipated. The two of them, who I hadn't seen in a decade, looked different. My ex-husband appeared worn out, while Sally seemed to be trying to maintain a youthful appearance but instead appeared older than her years. "I'm not comfortable with this sudden visit. Please leave. I came for my daughter. Is she here?" I demanded. "Stop. You're not coming in," I interrupted firmly. "Why? She's my daughter. If you don't let us in, I'll have to call the police." "This is trespassing," Sally argued. "What?" Sally's irritation at my firm refusal was evident as she raised her voice towards the house. "Hey Annie, you're in there, right? Stop this nonsense. Why are you interfering? Do you really think you're her real mom, Marie? You're nothing but a fraud. I'm the one who carried her in my womb and gave birth to her. A real mom is obviously superior." I wanted to retort to remind Sally of her decade-long absence and abandonment of Annie, but I hesitated, considering that my daughter might still harbor some curiosity about her biological mother. With that in mind, I found myself at a loss for words. Seeing my hesitation, Sally laughed triumphantly and pushed past me, striding into the house. "Annie, Mom." "Ha, you've grown up. I'm your real mom," Sally declared. Confused by the sudden intrusion, my daughter looked at Sally with a mix of fear and uncertainty. Sensing my daughter's unease, Sally's expression twisted into one of displeasure. "Has this woman been filling your head with lies about me? It's all untrue. She's the one who took you from me and pretended to be your mom. I'm your real mother," Sally insisted, her gaze shifting from me to my daughter. My daughter, angered by Sally's attitude, exclaimed, "Liar." "Yes, your aunt is the real liar, not me," Sally retorted. "What?" My daughter pointed directly at Sally, stunning both of us with her unexpected outburst. "Do you know how old I am? I'm almost 16, not 15. My mom raised me all these years, but she never told me about you. Still, I remember a little about you." Both Sally and I were speechless as my daughter continued, "I remember you yelling at me, not giving me food." "What? I never did such a thing," Sally denied vehemently. "You're not my mom. I have only one mom, not the one who gave birth to me, but the one who cared for and loved me. That's this mom," my daughter declared, pointing at me with conviction. My daughter gripped my sleeve tightly, and a surge of emotion overwhelmed me, threatening to spill tears. "What?" Sally exclaimed in frustration, her hand lifting as if to strike. Instinctively, I moved to shield my daughter, but Sally's movement abruptly halted. "Dad, it's you." My husband had returned without my notice, and he swiftly intervened, grasping Sally's arm and preventing any harm. Informed of the situation, he understood that Sally was the aggressor, while my ex-husband stood bewildered nearby, watching with a sharp gaze. "Are you both all right?" my husband asked calmly, his reassuring presence bringing a sense of relief to my daughter and me. Yes, we both replied, reassured by the steadiness in his eyes. You were married. My ex-husband, who had failed to intervene in Sally's violence, was taken aback. That's none of your concern, I responded firmly. How dare you remarry without me? You left me and vanished after the divorce, remember? My ex-husband's accusatory tone was met with stern gazes from both my husband and me, leaving him speechless. What? Marie remarried? Living in this grand house with a husband? This is absurd. I took everything from her. Why does she seem happy? Sally's voice cracked as she screamed, her disheveled hair adding to her erratic appearance. These people have treated Mom horribly. My mom is only my mom. My typically reserved daughter passionately defended me. It's all right. Stay here with Mom. Your parents are here too. We'll sort this out, my husband assured us, his gentle touch steadying me as I realized I was trembling uncontrollably. My husband escorted Sally and my ex-husband outside, their voices filled with nonsensical shouts. Mom, are you okay? My daughter's concern was evident in her voice. I'm sorry. I should have talked to you. I apologize, feeling a pang of regret. No, it's okay. I never told you either. I remembered my biological parents and thought you might be disappointed. If only I had done the right thing, I wouldn't have made you feel so insecure, my daughter admitted, her words heavy with remorse. I know you kept silent thinking of me. Me? I replied, tears streaming down my face as we embraced each other tightly. Fear, relief, and happiness mingled together as we cried together, the weight of the recent events finally released. Sally and my ex-husband were sternly reprimanded by my husband and parents for their unreasonable behavior. Despite their persistent attempts to reclaim my daughter, their motives were purely self-serving. My daughter's biological father, Sally's ex-husband, had recently passed away, leaving behind a significant inheritance for Annie, his legitimate daughter. Sally and my ex-husband sought to gain control of my daughter in pursuit of this inheritance. Sally, desperate for money, sought refuge at her parents' home, only to be turned away and ostracized. Though my daughter discovered the truth in a painful manner, she bravely accepted it and forged ahead. With the unwavering support of my loving daughter and devoted husband, I realized that family goes beyond blood ties. Our bond is rooted in love and resilience, surpassing any genetic connection. As I prepared breakfast with my daughter on a Sunday morning, I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with gratitude for our happiness and the strength of our family bond.
I've always held a special place in my heart for my grandparents, a sentiment that dates back to my early years. Perhaps it was because my parents were frequently away due to work commitments that I found solace in the warm embrace of Grandma and Grandpa. My name is Hilda, and at 31 years old, I stand on the brink of motherhood, eagerly anticipating the arrival of my first child. In these final months of my pregnancy, excitement bubbles within me, yet it's tempered by a nagging concern. My husband, Owen, who just turned 32. My worry stems from the subtle transformation I've observed in him. Lately, he's grown increasingly irritable, a phenomenon that coincides with what experts term digital caregiving. It was during an incident at my grandparents' house, where Owen was setting up their Wi-Fi, that his frustration reached a crescendo. Despite my grandparents' lack of need for Wi-Fi, we visited them occasionally. However, Owen's annoyance was palpable when he couldn't access his favorite paid movie site. He grumbled incessantly, even though my grandparents had personally funded the installation to accommodate his interests. His discontent seemed boundless, and he criticized every aspect of the installation process. My grandmother tried to correct his mispronunciations, pointing out that it was Google, not goggles, and Chrome, not columns. But her corrections only elicited a loud click of his tongue in response. I empathized with his frustration, but it left me with a sense of unease that defied explanation. Eventually, the installation was completed, but the atmosphere grew tense, far worse than the challenges of physical caregiving. It felt like a different, more insidious form of caregiving, one imposed by the digital world. I attempted to reason with Owen, suggesting that there were computer classes available for the elderly that he could learn from someone else. I even proposed hiring professional help if needed, but he dismissed my concerns with a sarcastic remark. expressing his fatigue and promptly left for his surfing hobby. This behavior was a departure from the man I married, a man who was once patient and kind. In the wake of his temperamental outbursts, Owen's attitude seeped into our home, leaving me feeling abandoned and helpless. I found myself seeking refuge at my grandparents' house, where I unwittingly vented my frustrations. My grandparents, wise in their years, offered a perspective that struck a chord with me. Perhaps, Grandma gently suggested, your husband feels like the impending arrival of the baby is pulling you away from him. The reason my love for my grandparents runs deep is their invaluable life experience, which they generously share as guidance. One evening during a visit, as I prepared to bid them farewell, my grandmother, in her thoughtful way, acknowledged the challenges of managing household chores while pregnant. She handed me a dish of homemade mac and cheese, a small but heartfelt gesture. However, when I served the same mac and cheese for dinner at home, my husband's complaints were swift and unrelenting. Ignoring his grumbles, I gently caressed my growing belly, now more susceptible to frequent kicks and agonizing back pain. My grandmother had prepared the meal with my condition in mind, but the issue went deeper. My husband's concern grew evident as he questioned my frequent visits to Grandma and Grandpa's, connecting it with my choice to bring back mac and cheese. I believed that serving the dish should be evidence enough of my love for him. But much like prenatal depression in expectant mothers, my grandmother suggested that something might be troubling him as well. He expressed his dissatisfaction with our dated dishes, comparing them to the cuisine of the 80s, before announcing his plan to go surfing. He dismissed the idea of eating the mac and cheese, seemingly convinced that the allure of modern pasta would outweigh his nostalgia. With a resigned sigh, I sat alone, wondering if the arrival of our baby might change his perspective, as my grandmother often emphasized the transformative power of a newborn. My hope was faint but persistent. I believed that our child's presence could lift the blues that had settled over us. The labor was grueling, 7 hours of intense pain followed by 3 more in the delivery room. It was a challenging initiation into motherhood, yet the sight of our baby's face made every hardship inconsequential. Despite being tiny, the baby resembled a miniature human down to their tiny fingers. I thought that perhaps my eternal blues and my husband's gloom could both dissipate in the face of this new life. Unfortunately, my husband never visited the hospital during my stay, nor did he make an effort to meet our newborn. Instead, when I returned home from the hospital, I was met with his continued absence. He questioned, his doubt evident in his eyes, "Is this really my child? You've often left home, claiming to visit your grandparents. I find it hard to believe." As I stood on the doorstep, holding our newborn, he coldly demanded, "Give me some of your hair. I need a DNA test to confirm if it's really your child." My heart raced with disbelief. Where did this come from? I thought. I had just endured the excruciating pain of childbirth. Was it fair for him to accuse me like this? Anger surged through me, an intensity I had never felt before. Was he really accusing me of infidelity? What infuriated me more was Owen's complete lack of joy in the presence of such an adorable baby. It felt like my very essence of motherhood was being negated. The next day, pushed beyond my limits, I poured out my grievances to my grandparents, who had come to check on the baby. My grandfather, perhaps trying to offer support from a male perspective, said, "If you haven't done anything wrong, why not take the DNA test?" Women can hold their heads high if they are innocent, but sometimes men need evidence to believe. Sharing objective facts is important. If this clears the suspicion, ask him to make it up to you with a nice cake or something. His words did offer a measure of solace, so I decided to submit my hair for the DNA test. I hadn't done anything wrong, and if this resolved things amicably, so be it. I convinced myself of my innocence. However, a week later, Owen slammed a paper with the test results in front of me, his face triumphant. "The test result is here. It's not my child. What's the meaning of this?" he declared, pointing at the paper that confirmed the absence of any genetic match with him. I stared at the paper in utter shock. "This is evidence of adultery," he stated, his voice laced with accusation. I was dumbfounded, with no memory of such an event. Clutching the damning evidence, I went to my grandparents' house, where tears flowed freely in their comforting embrace. After a brief silence, my grandfather spoke gently. "Hilda, you used to come to our house when you were in trouble, didn't you? It's okay. Leave the rest to me." He patted my shoulder with his wrinkled yet reassuring hand and then tenderly stroked my hair. The baby's soft fontanelle, yet to close, felt delicate beneath my touch. From my childhood, my grandfather had always reassured me, saying, "It's okay," and he continued to do so today. Large, heavy tears spilled down my cheeks as I whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa." A few days later, my grandfather made a significant move. He called Owen, summoning us all to their home for a weekend discussion, a discussion inevitably leading toward divorce. Owen arrived, his arrogance evident as he looked down at me, deliberately placing the DNA test results he had shown me earlier onto a table. While my parents were aware of the impending discussion, only the four of us, my grandparents, Owen, and I, were present, per my grandfather's decision. "For now, leave it to me," he had said. As we gathered in the living room of my grandparents' house, my grandfather began the conversation. He distributed copies of the DNA test results, irrefutable proof that there was no blood relation between Owen and the baby. Everyone examined the paper, and my grandfather proudly stated, "This is from Adam's clinic, as written here. There's no denying it." Owen, clearly baffled, asked about the appraisal. "What appraisal?" he questioned, his confusion evident. With an ominous chuckle, my grandfather placed some similar-looking hair on top of a copy of the appraisal result that Owen had prepared. "This is a genuine document from Adams Hospital where the DNA test results are recorded," my grandfather explained. "I had a test done to check the relationship between Grandma and her daughter, in other words, between Hilda's mother and her." I blinked in confusion, struggling to comprehend the situation. "Why?" I stammered, trying to make sense of it all. "Take a good look, Hilda," my grandfather grinned. "Compare this DNA report with the one he brought. The format, the style of the document, completely different." Beads of sweat formed on Owen's forehead as my grandfather continued. He recounted how, feeling slighted by Owen's suggestion that I attend computer classes for the elderly, he had indeed attended one. There, he had met a doctor from Adams Hospital. The doctor's familiarity with an appraiser led to an unexpected turn of events. When I saw the appraisal result that Hilda brought, I wondered why it was done at Adams Hospital instead of the Harris Maternity Clinic, where Hilda gave birth, my grandfather explained. "I assumed that if it was the maternity clinic, they would have conducted the test using Hilda's saliva. Truth is stranger than fiction, huh?" Up to this point, the grandfather's eyes had been filled with disbelief. When I asked the doctor at Adams Hospital, he continued, "He confirmed that your granddaughter hadn't taken any tests here." After further discussions, he suggested that showing you our official document would expose the lie clearly. Owen began to tremble. "This is forgery of private documents," the furious doctor at Adams Hospital had declared. "You should prepare for serious repercussions." "I'm sorry," Owen finally admitted, tears streaming down his face. "It was reckless. I never thought I'd get caught." "What do you mean, never thought?" "That makes it even more unforgivable," the grandfather reprimanded sharply. "I have no intention of forgiving you. I want to make this a tale to take to the grave. Let me tell you how I uncovered the lie." The roles of detective and suspect reversed. Listening to Hilda's claim, the grandfather decided to investigate using the computer skills he had recently acquired. With practiced movements, he logged into the computer and performed a search. "I did an image search for DNA test certificates," he said, emphasizing the words Google Chrome as his grandparents engaged in a lighthearted comedy routine. "The very first image that came up was identical to the document my husband initially showed me." Owen, now sobbing, was handed a bundle of papers by the grandfather. "Naturally, we're curious about the motive behind this forgery," the grandfather said, his tone stern. "I hacked into your computer." Upon hearing about Owen's surprisingly technical skills, he reflexively raised his head in astonishment. "Hacking? It wasn't just him who shouted, I did too. To be precise, I snooped into your computer, the one in your room." "How did you know the password?" It must be 4646 or 4633. Owen stammered in surprise. I heard it from a retired cop I met in a computer class, I said, explaining further. The surfers around this area mostly use 4646 or 4633 in their pins. Ah, Owen exclaimed in realization. It means going off. Exactly, I confirmed. The senior network at the computer class is something to be feared. So I tried inputting it on a whim, and lo and behold, I got access just like that. Grandpa continued, his excitement palpable. But cracking the password is impressive, but there's more. You know, when you look at the timeline on Google Maps, it shows all of your activity history. Sweat dripped from his chin onto the table. The ink on the fake DNA test report is smudging, so I investigated. And just so you know, this wasn't taught in class. I found this method by searching tirelessly to protect my precious grandchild. I searched for all the days when Hilda came to vent and the days you went surfing. I was shocked. All the destinations were shady motels. Here's the printed proof, Grandpa declared, slamming a stack of papers onto the table. But this alone won't. No, this is more than enough, don't you think? Ready to confess. Owen hesitated, but before he could respond, Grandpa ignored him and brought over a tablet. I borrowed all the data saved on your computer. Allowing messages to be viewed on the computer backfired on you. Flirting with this woman called Mally, I've transferred all that data onto this tablet. Grandpa opened the tablet screen, revealing a flood of evidence of Owen's infidelity, including messages like, Hotel Lagoon was nice, and I really want us to be a real couple soon. Winky face. Owen couldn't say a word anymore. It was you who told me to go to the computer class, wasn't it? Grandpa delivered the final blow, his voice firm with disappointment. How dare you neglect your heavily pregnant wife at such a delicate time? Realize the lowly act you have done as a man. You don't deserve to be the father of my adorable great-grandchild. You framed Hilda for cheating, hurt her, and used your own child as an excuse to frolic with your mistress. It's absolutely disgraceful. You deserve to be punished. Owen could only bow down in submission as Grandpa added insult to injury. I've copied the forged data from the DNA test report you made as evidence of your criminal activity, he said, rendering him completely incapacitated. Naturally, I ended up deciding to divorce him right after giving birth. But I received a hefty amount of compensation for his adultery, and of course, from his mistress as well. I made him pay child support in a lump sum. So financially, I've gotten a bit comfortable. I'm thinking of looking for a daycare for my child to attend soon. As the saying goes, when the money is gone, so is the relationship, and it was exactly the case with him and his mistress. I got inundated with crying emails from Owen saying, I'm broke, and the woman has left me. Please take me back, but I promptly blocked him. More importantly, he's being sued by Adam's Clinic for forging private documents. There's no way I could reconcile with such a person. Meanwhile, my child has been lovingly welcomed by my grandparents. Recently, they've started to chuckle at the sound of the bell when hitting a stuffed roly-poly toy with their fist. Children grow up fast. Looks just like Grandma, doesn't she? She's going to be a beauty, Grandpa says. No way, she's going to be much more beautiful than me. Grandma laughs too. Let's take pictures and make a photo movie. A baby's face changes every day. Grandpa, in a good mood, heads to his beloved computer. Thank you, Grandpa, Grandma. I really love you both. Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. If you resonated with the content, please leave a positive rating and a comment. If you can't give me a grandchild, then we should consider divorce, Jones declared. I hesitated for a moment before responding, Fine, I got it. But just as he was about to finalize his decision, I surprised him with the news. I am pregnant. You see, I'm a homemaker in my 30s, living with my husband Jones, who works in an office. Our love story began when I was working at a food-related company. Over time, we spoke many times regarding transactions, and I found myself falling for his occasional smiles. So I decided to take the initiative and propose a relationship. However, when I proposed, Jones rejected me saying, I'm sorry, I appreciate your feelings, but I already have a girlfriend. Yet destiny had other plans. A month later, he approached me, admitting, I broke up with my girlfriend and I would like to be with you. Apparently, since my confession, he couldn't stop thinking about me, which eventually led to his breakup with his girlfriend. I felt guilty for causing their breakup, but Jones reassured me with a smile, saying, don't worry about it, it probably wouldn't have lasted long anyway. His kindness saved our budding relationship. After 3 years of being together, we got married. At that time, Jones expressed his desire to have children after marriage and asked if I could stay at home to support him and our future family. I wasn't particularly attached to my job at a somewhat toxic company, so I decided to quit and become a full-time homemaker. The transition from a working woman to a homemaker turned out to be more challenging than I expected. But I didn't mind because our newly life was sailing smoothly, and I was constantly brimming with happiness. We also had the advantage of Jones's family living just a 10-minute walk from our apartment. Initially, I worried about frequent visits and potential issues with his parents, but my fears were unfounded. They were incredibly kind and helpful, always ready to explain things to me gently and kindly. Despite our childlessness, they never complained, often telling me, you are even dearer to us than a grandchild, and we only have boys in our family. We always wanted a daughter. Please let us pamper you like our real daughter. I had developed a strong bond with Jones's mother, Carol, and I trusted his father, Tom, who might be a man of few words, but he was incredibly reliable. However, this heartwarming relationship lasted only for the first few years. A few years into our marriage, the once kind attitude of Jones's parents began to change drastically. Gradually, Tom became even more reserved, and Carol underwent such a transformation that I began to suspect a dual personality within her. Perhaps, this harsh version of her was her true self. To quantify her change, if she was once at a plus 100 before, now she seemed to be at minus 100. That's how harshly she treated me. Living nearby, she started visiting our house frequently, especially when Jones was absent, nagging me incessantly and urging me to show her the face of my grandchild. According to her, it was a wife's duty. She would rush me to have a child. Although not long ago, she used to say, children are a gift from heaven. You don't have to try hard. You'll conceive naturally when the time comes, so don't rush. However, her attitude had taken a complete U-turn. She began to pressure me by mentioning other families, saying things like, the family over there recently had a baby, and the woman next door is pregnant. What about you? But no matter how much she pressed me for a grandchild, it was all meaningless if Jones wasn't ready. Despite his initial desire for children at the start of our marriage, a year into it, he had completely lost interest. Even my attempts to initiate intimacy were met with rejection. He would decline, saying he was tired, or dismiss me saying, don't interrupt my gaming. When I tried to explain this to Carol, she didn't seem to understand and continued pressuring me to have a child, increasing my stress day by day. Unable to endure her relentless attacks any longer, I finally confided in Jones about the pressure I was facing to have a grandchild. He grumbled his response, saying, I don't think we need to rush this, you know. Despite his reluctance, he agreed to increase our intimate time together as much as possible. Despite our joint efforts as a couple, getting pregnant seemed elusive. Moreover, throughout this time, Carol kept hurling insults at us, blaming our lack of success on our supposed lack of effort. At times, I suspected that the accumulated stress caused by her constant pressure might be making it even harder to conceive. Unable to withstand her relentless pressure any longer, I reached my breaking point. As a couple, we finally decided to undergo fertility treatments, hoping it would solve our struggles with conception. However, relief was short-lived as a new issue arose, one that centered around Jones. Ever since we embarked on the fertility treatment journey, he began to grow distant, retreating to his room to play video games immediately after returning from work, ignoring my attempts at conversation. Initially, I could tolerate his behavior, but it worsened over time. Jones became increasingly irritable, lashing out over small expenses related to my hobby, and unloading his work stress on me. Whenever I tried to defend myself, he would quickly lose his temper, emphasizing his role as the provider and labeling me a freeloader. No matter how many times I reminded him that I had quit my job to fulfill his wishes, he remained unyielding. One day, when he should have been going to work, I discovered he had quit without informing me. When I questioned him about it, he dismissively replied that it was none of my business. I felt a mix of disgust and helplessness. While I believed we could manage financially for a while through unemployment benefits and dipping into our savings, the fact that he showed no interest in finding a new job stressed me out immensely. With Jones spending his days at home, his main activities revolving around gaming and occasional trips to the convenience store, our face-to-face interactions increased significantly. However, instead of fostering affectionate moments, this newfound time together only intensified our arguments. Our discussions became strained, and gradually, we stopped talking altogether. I found myself questioning the purpose of continuing this married life. The once strong bond between us seemed to be eroding, and the realization slowly settled in that our marriage might be reaching its breaking point. I began contemplating an escape from the dismal situation. One day, utterly fed up with Jones idling away his time, playing games at home like a child, I confronted him. "You're not a kid. Stop playing games all the time and start looking for a job," I admonished him sternly. His response caught me off guard. "Oh, by the way, my mom told me that if we can't have a baby, we should get a divorce," he said casually. To my surprise, I felt a surge of gratitude towards Carol, something I never anticipated. After all, I was pregnant. I had discovered this during a recent checkup, planning to tell him that very night. However, now it seemed like the right decision not to disclose the news. With newfound determination, I said, "Okay, got it." I retrieved the already filled-out divorce papers from a drawer and handed them to him. He seemed taken aback, clearly not expecting me to agree to the divorce, let alone produce ready-to-sign papers. He stuttered and froze on the spot, his usual domineering attitude nowhere to be seen. He appeared dumbfounded. Though he seemed on the verge of saying something, the weight of his mother's words weighed heavily on him. Eventually, he reluctantly signed the divorce papers, continuously sneaking glances at me. Later, we gathered to discuss matters like property division. In reality, we didn't have much in terms of assets to worry about. While he had previously complained about my spending habits, it turned out he was the one with the more reckless financial behavior. He not only played games at home, but also spent significant amounts of money at game centers, depleting his finances. We had no savings or assets to split, and Jones realized this with growing dismay. Despite this, he pointed to a passbook with considerable savings, suggesting we divide that as well. However, I informed him that this savings account was not subject to property division. "This is the savings I accumulated before our marriage, so it is not part of property division," I explained calmly. His face paled even more. He then tried to claim rights over the condo we lived in. Unfortunately for him, the condo was in my name, and I had already put it up for sale. "You can't live here anymore. It would be a nuisance, so please leave immediately," I said with a smile. Besides, I thought this condo would become too small in the future, so I've been saving up for a new home, I added, watching his disbelief as I calmly asserted my independence. Saving money had always been my hobby, even when I had a regular job before marrying Jones. I had managed to save a significant amount, which I used to purchase this condo during a period of rapid advancement in my career. As a result, I owned substantial property. Even with the funds from selling the condo, I could afford to build a decent house downtown. Of course, all these assets were acquired during my single days, making them exempt from the current property division. It appeared my husband was unaware of this, as he seemed to believe he would be entitled to half of my assets. Upon realizing he wouldn't be part of the asset division, he was in a state of shock. We continued discussing, but he couldn't recover from his shock. With little left to discuss, the conversation ended swiftly. I submitted the divorce papers at the city office, and our divorce was finalized without a hitch. A few months later, I returned to my parents' home, where I received their unwavering support during the birth of my child. I safely delivered a healthy baby boy whom I named Ethan, a name borrowed from the Bible. Now, I spent my days contentedly with my loving child and parents. Of course, I hadn't informed Jones about our child, fearing Carol's interference if she found out. Meanwhile, Jones, who was evicted from the condo, retreated to his parents' home, but seemed to have become a recluse due to the shock of the easy agreement to the divorce. Occasionally, when he ventured out, his appearance seemed so suspicious that he often attracted the attention of law enforcement, making his situation quite pitiful. Later, I heard that he had quit his job due to interpersonal relationship issues. Apparently, he had a contentious attitude even at the office, especially disliked by female employees, leading to his isolation. Unable to cope, he abruptly quit one day. Perhaps he had always been that way, only showing kindness in front of me, a deceptive facade. 3 years later, I worked as the manager of a craft store, and it became a regular haunt for me. Around that time, the store owner approached me with an unexpected proposition. "I'm getting old and thinking of retiring. If it's all right with you, would you like to take over this store?" Considering my parents' active help with childcare, I had ample free time. The idea of having a job to keep myself occupied seemed appealing. Besides, declining the offer would inconvenience many regular customers, so I accepted without hesitation. As I was serving one of the occasional regular customers that day, I received an unexpected visit from Carol and Jones. Their thinly veiled flattery about the store irritated me. "Well, what brings you here?" I inquired. Carol mumbled something incomprehensible, eventually demanding, "Give my grandchild back to me." Evidently, she had learned about my child's birth and was contemplating making the child her heir. "Why did you keep it a secret?" "We were already in the process of divorcing," Jones accused, clearly agitated. "I kept quiet because I wanted the divorce. I knew you both would do anything to prevent it if you found out I was pregnant," I shot back, glaring at them. Carol persisted, insisting that I return her grandchild, emphasizing the 3 years we had spent together. Her demand left me utterly flabbergasted. Just then, my parents and Ethan entered the scene, sensing the tension. They asked, "What's the matter? Is there a problem?" It appeared that they hurried over after receiving a message from a regular customer. Spotting Ethan holding hands with my parents, Carol approached him, cooing, "Oh, how cute. He looks just like Jones when he was a child." "Look, I'm your grandma." I attempted to intervene, but Ethan, with surprising determination, declared, "I only have one grandma," and hugged my mother. Consequently, my mother politely asked Carol to leave. However, Jones attempted to forcibly take Ethan away from my parents, shouting, "Just give the kid to my mother." I stood in front of him, trying to protect Ethan, but my physical strength was no match for his. I was easily pushed aside. Jones was inches away from grabbing Ethan's arm when, out of nowhere, my father executed a perfect shoulder throw, sending Jones flying into the air. I looked up in astonishment to see my father, a skilled police officer who had even competed in national championships during his student days. Jones, completely unaware of my father's abilities, could only stare in pain and shock. My father, unfazed, said, "If you intend to bother my child and grandchild any further, I'm ready to take necessary actions. What do you want to do?" He showed his police badge to Carol, who turned pale, and they both hurried away. I never found out what happened to Carol and Jones after that, and frankly, I didn't want to know. Several years later, Ethan began aspiring to become a police officer, inspired by my father's courage and skills. "When I grow up, I'm going to be a police officer too, so I can protect Mom," he declared. Under my father's guidance, Ethan diligently worked on his studies, and his martial arts skills became unbeatable among his peers. I plan to continue watching over my wonderfully grown son, grateful for the support and protection my father had provided. Thank you for watching this video until the end. If you found the content relatable, please consider leaving a positive